My family went bankrupt, and unable to bear the blow, I lost my memory. The boy I used to bully for years came to watch the spectacle. Crying, I clutched his leg. My foot hurts so much. I must be sick. I can't walk. Woo woo. Originally coming to gawk, Alvis Monroe ended up carrying me home in a daze. Once he regained his senses, he wanted to toss me out. I had already started to pick at him, with a scrunched up nose. This isn't silk, so I don't want it. The room is too small. I can't get used to it. Woo woo. My life is so hard. Later, Alvis Monroe became a business tycoon because he had to support me, and I regained my memory. On the eve of our engagement, I nervously asked him, I have a friend who suddenly realized everything was wrong, and wants to go back. What do you think? Alvis Monroe smiled warmly. Catch her, break her legs, and lock her up for life. Zona London. There's no such thing as taking advantage without paying. My father's company went bankrupt, and our home turned chaotic. My stepmother silently took all the money and tried to leave. When I discovered this, her son pushed me down the stairs, and they hurriedly fled. When I woke up again, I groaned, clutching my head, which hurt so much that tears streamed down my face. Deserve it. A voice filled with adolescent rispiness rang out. I looked up, dizzy, and took a while to see the person's face. He was about 17 or 18, wearing a faded blue and white school uniform. When he noticed I was looking at him, a hint of disgust flickered in his narrow peach blossom eyes. Who is he? He seems so familiar, but I can't remember. The spot where I was hit throbbed with pain, and I covered my head, my face pale. Only then did Alvis Monroe notice the bump on my head. The bleeding had stopped, but it still looked terrifying. He maliciously curled his lips. Your family is bankrupt. If you don't get treated in time, you can only wait to die. Although I couldn't remember anything, I still had basic common sense, and hearing this almost made me cry again. The boy in front of me looked full of malice, but he was the first person I saw after waking up. How bad could he really be? Besides, he hadn't done anything to me for a long time. Resolute, I tearfully clung to Alvis Monroe's leg. My foot hurts so much. I must be sick. I can't walk. Woo woo. Tears and snot smeared on Alvis Monroe's leg. He was already a neat freak, and his face darkened. He suddenly regretted provoking me, knowing I was someone with no common sense who would only scream and shout, let go. Noticing Alvis Monroe wanted to leave, I cried even harder. I sniffled. I don't remember anything. My head hurts. My foot hurts. And my heart feels heavy. Am I going to die? Brother, I can only rely on you now. You won't abandon me, right? I clung to his leg pitifully, looking up at him with as much sorrow as I could muster. A liar. I spilled everything to seek refuge. He was hardly my brother. Just days ago, I had bullied him with my head held high, and now I was acting pitiful. Alvis Monroe didn't want to pay me any mind, but I clung tightly to his leg without any shame. After a moment of stalemate, Alvis Monroe, with a thicker skin than mine, ground his teeth. Let go. I pretended not to hear. If you don't let go, how will we leave? He relented. I immediately released him, blinking innocently, eager to please. Alvis Monroe was exasperated and didn't want to look at me. He turned to leave, but I grabbed his clothes. Under his predatory gaze, I timidly spoke. My leg hurts. I can't walk. He looked at me as if he found it amusing and didn't want to drag it out any longer. He squatted down in front of me. I cautiously climbed onto his back and didn't forget to thank him. Brother, you're so nice. I'll repay you when I have money. Who would believe the words of a spoiled and willful young lady? He didn't believe a word of it. Walking through a dark, narrow alley, we finally arrived at Alvis Monroe's home, which was completely different from the place I had woken up in. Here, it felt abandoned. The entire building had faded, dark, and heavy. Alvis Monroe's house stood here, gray and dilapidated. I was curious about everything here. Leaning on his back and looking around, Alvis Monroe opened the door, and I immediately hopped off his back and entered the house. Touching this and examining that, a splash of color intruded into the gray world. It seemed that Alvis Monroe only then realized he had brought home this troublesome person, someone who had bullied him. He suddenly came to his senses, and wanted to kick me out. Meanwhile, I was very comfortably choosing a spot to rest for the night. showing no awareness of being a guest in his home. This bed sheet is too rough. It hurts me. The bed is too small. I can't get used to it. I'm so hungry. I really want to eat. I rambled on so much that my mouth felt dry, only to suddenly realize Alvis Munro hadn't said a word. His silence was terrifying, like a small animal that had just realized it was in danger. I shut my mouth and stopped talking. Alvis Munro silently closed the door and sat down on the sofa in front of me. He squinted his eyes. Zona London. Have you forgotten that just a few days ago, you cornered me in an alley and scolded me, telling me not to appear in front of you? Now that your family is bankrupt, you've latched onto me. There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. What he said, I couldn't remember at all, but from his words, I gathered that I had bullied him before, and when things went south, I had the audacity to cling to him, but he was currently the only person I could rely on. I scratched my hands. I don't remember. My head hurts. I can't recall anything. I'm sorry. Alvis Munro studied me, unsure if he believed me. After a long while, his long fingers tapped the table, his voice carrying a unique raspy tone. Do you want to stay? I nodded. But I don't have such good conditions. You've seen it. The bed sheets aren't soft, and the bed isn't big. Before he finished speaking, I eagerly interrupted him. I can accept it, okay, but there are conditions. I pouted. What conditions? Be obedient. Don't throw tantrums. If I tell you to go east, you can't go west. Is that all? I readily agreed. That night, Alvis Munro slept on the floor, and I slowly climbed out of bed and stood in front of him. He was very alert, and immediately opened his eyes to meet my gaze, grinding his teeth. What are you doing up? Why aren't you sleeping? I pouted and started to cry. My legs hurt. I can't sleep. Woo-woo. My life is so hard. I stretched out my arms, revealing a circle of red spots on them. Alvis Munro cursed under his breath. What a nuisance. I'll take you to buy some tomorrow. I stared at him in silence, and he, feeling agitated, ran his fingers through his hair. You're dreaming. Who would go out at night just to buy you bed sheets? Half an hour later, I rolled around on the new sheets, feeling satisfied, and sweetly said, thank you, brother. Alvis Munro ignored me and slammed the door shut. At this stage, just after the college entrance exams, Alvis Munro was working at a repair shop. I followed him there. Alvis Munro couldn't resist me, saying, if you find it dirty, I won't take you home. Once we arrived, the place was filled with car parts. The smell of gasoline was strong, and the ground was dark. I subtly wrinkled my nose. Alvis Munro, look who's here. A few boys, looking about the same age as him, exchanged knowing glances, grinning mischievously. In the gray repair shop stood a splash of color, a girl with braided hair, her lips a delicate shade, looking gentle, her cheeks flushed. She spoke in a delicate voice. Don't joke around. Stepping closer, she asked, Alvis Munro, have you thought about which school to apply to? Alvis Munro waved his hand indifferently. I'll decide after the scores come out. Alvis Munro, haven't you always wanted to go to South University? Why are you keeping it a secret from John Finger? That's not like you. Alvis Munro shot him a glance and didn't respond. I had originally stood outside waiting for Alvis Munro to get me a small stool. I kicked at a small stone on the ground when suddenly a feeling of gloom washed over me. Alvis Munro, I don't want a stool anymore. Carry me in. The others inside heard my voice, exchanged glances, and fell silent. Alvis Munro came back, his expression serious, carrying a strong sense of pressure. What did I say before we left? I knew it was my fault, but I felt inexplicably uncomfortable. I bit my lip and replied, you just said whether you would carry me or not. Without a second thought, he said, no, Zona London. We are classmates. Alvis Munro is not your servant. Can you please stop bullying him? John Finger's gentle yet firm voice rang out, standing protectively in front of Alvis Munro like a hen guarding its chick. Alvis Munro's friend chimed in. You relied on the London family to bully him before. Now that the London family is bankrupt, if you dare bully Alvis Munro again, watch out for me. Milo Morse. Shut up. Before Milo Morse could finish, Alvis Munro silenced him, frowning deeply, and squatted down in front of me. Didn't you want to be carried? Get on. I slowly climbed up, whispering, "Take me back, TSK, what a nuisance." On the way back, I swung my legs and quietly chatted, "I don't like them. I hate them." Got it. When the college entrance exam results came out, I barely passed the first tier, and Alvis Monroe and I ended up at the same university. Once in college, he was very busy. Besides the daily greetings on his phone, we rarely saw each other. John Finger also attended this university. In her sophomore year, she asked to meet with me. "I just found out you lost your memory. Alvis Monroe has been very good to you. Even though you bullied him, he still took you in when you had nowhere else to go. But he's just a student too. Don't you think it's a bit unfair that you keep relying on him and spending his money? Besides, you once stepped all over him and nearly ruined his life. And now you..." She left her words hanging. Before she walked away, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Zona London, if I were you, I would have been too ashamed to stick around, rather than shamelessly relying on Alvis Monroe." John Finger was right, but I was too thick-skinned to take her advice. Like a fledgling bird, I depended on Alvis Monroe and didn't want to leave him, but I really couldn't keep spending Alvis Monroe's money. It wasn't easy for him to earn it either. For a long time, I hadn't touched the money in Alvis Monroe's account. Instead, I took on part-time work during my free time to barely support myself. When school was out, Alvis Monroe went to another city for some unknown reason. After letting him know I was safe, I found myself so hungry that I couldn't sleep, so I sat on the stairs munching on bread. Suddenly, someone snatched the bread from my hands. I noticed a small mole on their thumb, making me want to reach out and touch it. I didn't even need to think to know who it was. After crushing the bread bag, Alvis Monroe threw it into a nearby trash bin and growled, "Is this your idea of a feast?" I knew I was in the wrong, so I gave him a sheepish smile. "I'm on a diet." Alvis Monroe didn't seem to believe me. He had changed a lot over the past 2 years, shedding the youthful naivety and developing a more commanding presence. Under his cold gaze, I felt a pang of guilt. "Why aren't you using your card?" I had anticipated his question and had prepared my response. "I haven't spent all the money you gave me yet, so I don't need to use the card." TSK. His face darkened completely. "Zona London, how did I never realize you're such a good liar?" He rarely spoke to me in such an aggressive tone, and my nose tinged with emotion as I lowered my head. "You work hard for your money. I just want to help ease the burden." Alvis Monroe's cold demeanor softened a bit as he paused. "Zona London, have you ever checked how much money is in your card? I'm not pathetic enough to need you to earn money for me, but..." I still felt embarrassed. "We're not even in a relationship. I don't think I owe you anything." Yes, I had completely realized who I was. With my reckless spending habits, I could never pay him back. "Zona London, are you reminding me of something? Alright, then let's just get engaged." I have no idea how things escalated to the point of engagement. I thought Alvis Monroe was just joking until I was taken to get measured for a custom dress. That was when I realized he was serious. But we weren't even a couple. Why would we get engaged? I bit my finger nervously, unsure how to respond. However, Alvis Monroe misunderstood my hesitation. We still lived in the same old alley, where cars couldn't enter. The road was narrow, and most of the time, I would act spoiled and make him carry me. He squatted down willingly. As I climbed onto his back, a wave of dizziness hit me. Memories flooded my mind like a movie, and I closed my eyes in disbelief, only to reopen them with a dry throat. I have a friend who suddenly realizes everything is wrong, and now wants to go back to where it all began. "What do you think?" Alvis Monroe paused, but his gentle tone sent a chill down my spine. "I will bring her back, break her legs, and lock her up for life." Zona London, there's no such thing as getting something for nothing. I lay stiffly on his back, my mind racing, and I didn't dare say a word. When we got home, Alvis Monroe went to cook, donning the pink apron I bought him, moving effortlessly in the kitchen. I leaned against the sofa, watching him, gradually getting lost in thought. In middle school, Alvis Monroe was the star of the school, consistently holding the top spot in the grade and admired by everyone. He was also someone I needed to please as a student who struggled academically. Alvis Monroe struck me as quiet, not very talkative, and preferred to be alone. He didn't have much of a social life and hardly any money, but he was good looking, and attractive people are welcomed everywhere. Even if they are poor, there were always people confessing their feelings to him. Of course, he had his fair share of haters, especially among those boys who felt overshadowed. But at the time, I didn't realize how strong jealousy could be among boys. I was easily swayed. There was a sweet-talking boy in my class, who was quite friendly with me, helping me with my homework and cleaning duties, so I thought very highly of him. In my heart, I had already accepted him as my little brother. But he got beaten up by Alvis Monroe right before my eyes. It completely changed my perception of Alvis Monroe. I had thought he was just a bit shy and introverted, but when it came to fighting, he was wild and unruly, as if he had broken some kind of seal, exuding a very rebellious aura. I stood at the alley entrance, ready to slip away. He looked so fierce that I was afraid if I approached, he might hit me too. Merlin Bloom had almost no fighting power. It only took a few blows from Alvis Monroe to take him down, leaving him sprawled on the ground. When he tilted his head, he saw me, and in that moment, he looked more excited than if he had seen his own mother. Zona London, did you come to save me? I knew it. You're the best person for me, he cried like a fool. I silently clenched my toes, forced myself to turn back, and straighten my back, trying to muster some courage. Alvis Monroe, classmates should care for one another. How can you bully a fellow student? Be careful, or I'll tell the teacher. Honestly, I didn't want to confront Alvis Monroe. What if he refused to let me copy his homework? Alvis Monroe didn't even glance at me. At such a young age, he was already quite tall, and he shot me a contemptuous look as he passed by, leaving me with a dismissive remark. Idiot, so arrogant and disdainful. I was furious. But as my gaze caught the muscles he hid under his uniform, I swallowed my anger. Merlin Bloom lay on the ground, looking at me expectantly. I took out my phone, and called the teacher in the infirmary, but personally taking him to the infirmary was just too exhausting. Weeks later, I found out that it was Merlin Bloom, who had first bullied Alvis Monroe. He just didn't manage to beat him, which led to Alvis Monroe's victory, but I couldn't bring myself to apologize to him. So I secretly gave him a gift as a form of amends. However, he didn't even look at it, completely ignoring me, and his proud demeanor made my heart ache with frustration. My dad was hopelessly romantic but didn't have good taste. My mom was a heartbreaker who left me and my dad to fend for ourselves when I was 2. My stepmother appeared to be my dad's wife, but in reality, she was just brought in to take care of me now that I was older. All these years, my dad had spoiled me like a precious gem, and his business had grown. Very few dared to ignore me like he did. Back then, I was still immature, and started to pick fights with Alvis Monroe over something trivial. Knowing he was short on money, I used it to manipulate him into doing this and that for me. I knew he returned home to an empty house, but I still made him walk me home first before he could go back. If we ran into someone familiar who spoke up for Alvis Monroe, it would trigger my ire, and I'd stage a show of bullying Alvis Monroe. To continue this bullying, I strained myself to barely pass the entrance exam, and managed to enroll in the same high school as him. Using my dad's influence, I got us placed in the same class, and all of this was just minor mischief. What drastically deteriorated my relationship with Alvis Monroe was the incident with Merlin Bloom. I didn't expect Merlin Bloom to end up at this high school. I thought he could only attend a vocational school. Merlin Bloom thought I bullied Alvis Monroe for his sake, and was moved to tears. That day, I left Alvis Monroe alone in the classroom to help me with my homework when Merlin Bloom barged in. He looked genuinely touched. Zona London, I just realized you're the one I truly love. I was blind to treat Luna as my pearl, and ignore you. Now I see the light. They say a prodigal son returning is worth more than gold. Zona London, let's be together. I gave him a confused look. Huh? Asterisk snap asterisk, the sound of something breaking. I turned to see Alvis Monroe coldly breaking the pen in his hand. He glared at Merlin Bloom. If you don't want to die, get lost. Merlin Bloom seemed to forget the beating he had taken from Alvis Monroe and provocatively said, "What do you think you are to tell me to go? Haven't you learned your lesson yet?" He plopped down next to me like he owned the place. Zona London, you should tell this eyesore to get lost. Don't let him disturb us. I couldn't take it anymore. How did I ever think this guy was sweet-talking? He was rotten to the core. I stood up, and before I could teach him a lesson, Alvis Munro grabbed Merlin Bloom by the neck and lifted him up, overpowering him as he began to hit him. In just a few blows, Merlin Bloom was lying helplessly on the ground. I was stunned and rushed to grab Alvis Munro's arm. Stop it, he might really kill him. Alvis Munro's gaze was icy, his lips pressed into a line. You're stopping me for this garbage? I'm not. Wait, he was my enemy. Why was I even explaining myself? Merlin Bloom smiled knowingly from the ground. Zona London. Thank you, you really love. Ouch. Alvis Munro punched him in the gut, and he doubled over in pain, unable to speak. After that incident, Alvis Munro's attitude toward me dropped significantly. Although it wasn't great before, it was clear there was a difference. In the following 2 years, we would often exchange sarcastic remarks whenever we met. My methods of bullying him escalated, and I would occasionally corner him in the alley to give him a beating. But I stroked my chin. Was what John Finger said about me stepping on Alvis Munro and nearly ruining his life a bit too much? I had forgotten about it. I mostly made him do my homework and walked me home, occasionally cornering him in a small alley to hit him a few times. That was just minor mischief, right? It wasn't that malicious, was it? I sighed, not realizing that after losing my memory, it was Alvis Munro who had saved me. Now, how could I repay him for his kindness? Unable to sleep, I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, then got out of bed and fished out a card from my bag. The card contained 20,000 yuan, which I had earned from my part-time job. It wasn't much. Even the small change Alvis Munro had given me was more. We're both human. How did Alvis Munro manage to earn so much money while I struggled to make ends meet? Just after 6 o'clock, I got up. Alvis Munro was in the shower, and I nervously waited outside, clutching the card. Now that my memory was restored, it felt strange to be with Alvis Munro, like there was an unspoken embarrassment about being saved by my enemy. Alvis Munro came out, drying his hair, wrapped only in a towel, broad shoulders and narrow waist, droplets of water trickling down his chest muscles, with a clear line of definition. When did his figure become so good? My cheeks were slightly flushed as I shyly handed him the card. He pinched the card and scrutinized it. What's this for? I steeled myself and said, there's 20,000 here. Not much, but I'll pay you back slowly when I have money. Hearing this, his expression darkened. What do you mean? I've been mooching off you for the past few years, and that's not right. I can't keep using your money without paying you back. Paying me back means we're square. His tone was flat, and his gaze was cold and dangerous. I scratched my head. We didn't really have much of a relationship anyway. Alvis Munro let out a cold laugh, looking at me like I was a corpse. From what I knew of Alvis Munro, don't let his calm demeanor fool you. He had already planned for my downfall. If I didn't say something, I believed Alvis Munro would really take my life. Brother, don't be angry. I just feel bad that you work so hard for money. Thinking that I used to speak to Alvis Munro like this when I had amnesia made me wish I could lose my memory again. I've said it before. I'm not so pathetic as to let you go work for money. Take it. I stared at his cold back, sighed. Did he really think I wanted to give this to him? This little bit of money used to be nothing, but I was just trying to do something for my conscience. Woe is me. I really want to spend money. I want to buy a bag. Alvis Munro left, but before he went out, he gave me another card to spend at will. After checking the balance, I began to wonder what Alvis Munro was doing outside that made him so suddenly wealthy. Though he had treated me to food and drink over the past few years, he clearly didn't have the lavish lifestyle he did now. I slumped on the sofa, feeling like punching the world. The doorbell rang. Thinking Alvis Munro had forgotten something, I hurried to the door, but instead of him, I found John Finger and some of Alvis Munro's high school friends. I frowned. Alvis Munro isn't here. I was about to close the door when one hand pressed against it, and John Finger smiled gently. It's okay, we're not looking for Alvis Munro. We're here for you. I still didn't want to let them in, standing my ground. Just tell me what you want. One after another, they began to speak, while John Finger stood by, silent. First of all, congratulations on your engagement to Alvis Munro. But Zona London, you've lost your memory and don't know. You caused Alvis Munro to nearly lose a leg back then. Even after it was treated, it still hurts on rainy days. And you shamelessly relied on Alvis Monroe after losing your memory. You, with your spoiled rich girl attitude, want the best of everything? And Alvis Monroe has to work hard to earn money for you. When he had to bow and scrape for others to start his business, you happily spent his money. And now you're coaxing Alvis Monroe into marrying you. Just because Alvis Monroe is kind and doesn't hold grudges doesn't mean we don't. This was simply ridiculous. When did I cause Alvis Monroe to lose a leg? Sure, I did corner him and bully him back then, but I only hit him a couple of times, and I didn't even use much force. This isn't how you get someone to play the victim. I was really angry. Back then, Milo Morse had the most hostility toward me, and he still did now. He sneered, "You just won't admit it, and won't let Alvis Monroe go." But John Finger realized something else. "You've recovered your memory." His tone was so certain. There was nothing to hide. I had to confront them properly since I had recovered my memory. I nodded. "Now that you've recovered your memory, you're still clinging to Alvis Monroe's house." Someone muttered. They outnumbered me, and I couldn't argue back, so I was about to close the door. "Since you've recovered your memory, then your dad, Christ London, doesn't need Alvis Monroe to pay for his care, right?" I suddenly looked at the guy who said this. "What do you mean? My dad, Alvis Monroe, is paying for his care? What's going on?" It turned out that on the night my stepmother ran away with the money, my dad couldn't handle the blow and jumped from the 8th floor. He was lucky. On the way down, he caught onto a tree branch, which broke his fall. So he didn't die instantly, but surviving was almost worse. He became a vegetable, lying half dead in the hospital. This was impossible. My dad had no feelings for my stepmother. He was an optimistic person who couldn't be brought down by anything. How could he jump off a building after a blow like that? Don't believe it? You can go see for yourself. At the Central City Hospital, in the hospital room, the caregiver Alvis Monroe hired was taking care of my dad. Over the years, besides me, my dad had been well taken care of. I already owed Alvis Monroe more than I could repay. What John Finger said still echoed in my ears. "Back then, Alvis Monroe nearly lost a leg because of you. Even if it wasn't you directly, it was still related to you. Do you still have the nerve to stay by Alvis Monroe's side and marry him?" My emotions were in chaos, and that night I didn't return to Alvis Monroe's place, but went to my best friend's house. Stacy Elliott was my childhood friend, and even though I had lost my memory, we kept in touch. "Did you have a fight with Alvis Monroe? Run away from home?" She wiggled her way over to me, resting her head against mine. "Seriously, what do you feel for Alvis Monroe? As your best friend, I can't find a single fault in him. He's willing to support you for years, and you're quite a spender. When he first started supporting you, he was so poor. He didn't hold back on what you ate and wore. Alvis Monroe is really a good guy." Realizing what she was saying, I blushed. "What are you talking about? How could Alvis Monroe and how could I?" TSK, TSK, TSK. Stacy Elliott looked at me with disdain. "Girl, you can fool others, but don't fool yourself." She bent down to look at me. "You really don't like him? For real?" I was so embarrassed I buried my face in the blanket. "I like him." "Okay. If I didn't like him, how could I cling to him, no matter what? If I didn't like him, how could I fight to attend the same high school as him? If I didn't like him, how could I find opportunities to be around him?" Mooching off him after losing my memory was just my subconscious feelings of affection and reliance acting up. "But," I murmured, "I still don't know if Alvis Monroe likes me. You know I did go a bit overboard and bullied him." Before I could finish, Stacy Elliott interrupted. "That wasn't bullying. It was more like, hit is to love. Besides, it's totally normal for him to like you. You're beautiful and kind-hearted. You might have been a bit spoiled and spent too much, but that's nothing. You've got more advantages than flaws. You're basically all advantages." I moved my lips, wanting to say something, but she pinched my mouth shut and shook her head. "Honey, listen to me. You're too close to the situation to see clearly." "But I can see it clearly. Alvis Monroe isn't an idiot. He wouldn't support you for no reason. But you're broke and spoiled. So what could he want from you? Only you as a person. The most important thing is, you're not just after his body. You're after his money. From what I hear, Alvis Monroe's current worth is no less than this amount." She held up a number. Do you think with your ability, you can live a wealthy life? I shook my head vigorously. Well then, there you go, sister. The most important thing is to enjoy the present. I can guarantee you he definitely likes you. If he didn't, why would he want to marry you? I suddenly understood, and all the confusion that had bothered me all day was resolved. I hugged Stacy Elliott. Sweetie, you're the real master. Stacy Elliott elegantly rolled her eyes. No, I'm just the real fool. My phone had just died, so I took it to charge. A college student can't go to bed without a phone. It has to be by my side for a sense of security. As soon as I turned it on, there were countless missed calls and messages, all from the same person, Alvis Monroe. New messages came in. Come down, or I'll come up. Stealing a guilty glance at my best friend, who was watching videos beside me, I cautiously put on my shoes and went to the balcony. I saw a familiar figure under the streetlight. It was as if he knew I was looking at him. He lifted his eyes and caught my gaze. I instinctively stepped back, but before I knew it, my best friend had come over and noticed Alvis Monroe as well. She crossed her arms and said, "If you want to go, just go." I hesitated, so I'm going. She couldn't stand it anymore and kicked me out the door. Get lost. I walked a bit fast, panting heavily. When I reached Alvis Monroe, I suddenly felt shy and couldn't look him in the eye. What are you doing here? You don't have to take what Milo Morse and the others said to heart. I'm no longer friends with them. My leg injury has nothing to do with you. And as for taking care of your dad, I just don't want you to be sad after recovering your memory, he explained patiently, each word heavy, his deep eyes reflecting a small version of me. Being looked at like that made me lower my gaze and confess, Alvis Monroe, I've recovered my memory. The Zona London, who liked to go against you and bullied you, is back. I know. His tone was flat. You know. Oh, did John Finger tell you? No, I knew that night. I widened my eyes. How did you know? Secret. Alvis Monroe refused to elaborate. So he had known I recovered my memory long ago. I stood there, fidgeting. Is there anything you want to say about my recovery of memory? Like mocking me or ridiculing how I clung to him after losing my memory, just as they had stated. Actually, there is. He seemed to remember something, and his expression darkened. Keep your eyes open. Don't trust just anyone. I was confused. Huh? Merlin Bloom. He only said one name and refused to say more. It seemed he was jealous. I recalled what my best friend said about him liking me. I tugged at his sleeve. Alvis Monroe, do you like me? He didn't speak but finally sighed in exasperation. Zona London. I think I've been obvious. I liked you since middle school. Are you happy now? I got a good deal but acted coy, happily tiptoeing a bit. If you like me, then I like you too. Thinking about how Alvis Monroe directly skipped the dating phase and proposed to me, I pressed down on his computer in frustration. The engagement is off. The proper sequence should be to date first, spend some time as boyfriend and girlfriend, and then you propose to me? Alvis Monroe narrowed his eyes. Not boyfriend and girlfriend. I always thought we had been together for a long time. I rolled my eyes secretly. When did that happen? In your dreams. During our freshman year, when you had dinner with your roommates, you confessed to me and asked me to be your boyfriend, and I agreed. His words unlocked a dusty memory. It was the first dinner gathering in the dorm. It was supposed to be a simple meal for the girls, but someone suggested we all drink since we were adults, and there were so many of us. The four of us were eager to try, and before we knew it, we were all tipsy. By the time Alvis Monroe came to pick me up, I was so drunk I didn't even know who I was. That day, I acted like a little rascal, even though I could barely walk. I was clinging to Alvis Monroe, kissing and hugging him. I remember groping his 8-pack abs with a lewd smile and even whistling, "Hey, handsome, want to hang out with me and enjoy the good life?" Alvis Monroe, with a cold expression, picked up a towel to wipe my face while I squirmed like a slippery fish. Still not giving up, I wanted to taste what Alvis Monroe's lips were like. At first, I managed to steal a couple of kisses when he wasn't paying attention, but soon he became wary and wouldn't let me kiss him anymore. Beneath the white blanket, a pair of sneaky eyes peeked out. Alvis Monroe's temples throbbed as I quickly jumped out from under the blanket to kiss him, only to be caught by the alert Alvis Monroe. Pouting, I said. You're so stingy. How can I get a kiss? I only kiss my girlfriend. Using my not-so-clear thinking brain, I reasoned. Then I'm your girlfriend now, so give me a kiss. Alvis Munro paused in wiping my face, his deep, warm eyes reflecting a complex emotion. His warm fingers brushed over my lips. You're drunk. What you say isn't trustworthy. Drunk people never admit they're drunk. So I held my head high and replied, I'm not drunk. I'm very clear-headed and know exactly what I'm saying. I am your girlfriend. Then I eagerly pouted, waiting for him to kiss me. Alvis Munro had already started wiping my hands, and compared to my urgency, he appeared particularly composed. Are you sure? You might regret it when you're sober. I rolled my eyes elegantly, mustering up some strength to tug at his collar and lean in. Satisfied, I found his lips soft and sweet. Savoring the moment, Alvis Munro watched me calmly and said, remember now. My confidence wavered a bit, but I still declared solemnly, I'm drunk. He lightly replied, but I took it seriously, so I decided to play coy, sitting on his lap and kissing him. Come on, big brother, can we date? Alvis Munro held my waist, his voice turning hoarse. Stop being difficult. Behave yourself. I leaned closer to his Adam's apple, noticing how his throat couldn't help but bob up and down. His big hand tightened around my waist, and Alvis Munro's eyes darkened with desire. Zona London, you asked for this. My retorts got swallowed down. I met with John Finger and Milo Morse again. They no longer had the arrogant attitude from our last meeting. Their gazes toward me were tinged with clear apprehension. It was obvious they had been warned by Alvis Munro. I got straight to the point. I want to know how Alvis Munro got hurt. Tell me the truth. From the reluctant expression on Milo Morse's face, I learned the truth about what happened back then. The one responsible for Alvis Munro's leg injury was Merlin Bloom. He had harbored resentment against Alvis Munro, and naively thought I was deeply in love with him. After Alvis Munro fought him that time, I warned him again that I only considered him a little brother, and that bullying Alvis Munro was never for his sake. So he better not be delusional, and stop bothering Alvis Munro in the future. At that time, my family had not gone bankrupt, and even though Merlin Bloom hated me, he didn't dare do anything to me and could only take it out on Alvis Munro. With a bit of money in his family, he liked to play dirty. One night when Alvis Munro was returning home alone, he surrounded Alvis Munro and had him beaten up. Knowing that an average person wouldn't stand a chance against Alvis Munro, Merlin Bloom found some dangerous thugs. If someone hadn't passed by and called the police that day, Alvis Munro might have faced a dire fate. John Finger was right. Even if it wasn't me, it was still related to me. Alvis Munro wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't a good person either. During those years when he quietly grew up, he had already taken his revenge. The Bloom family went bankrupt, and Merlin Bloom had one of his legs broken by debt collectors, leaving him in a daze. When I found him, I almost didn't recognize him. When our eyes met, he recognized me too, and his eyes flared with hatred. It's all because of you, you bitch. Why don't you like me? I bet my friends that if I treated you well, you would come to me like a dog. But in the end, you all lied to me, you filthy whore. So he had bad intentions from the start. No wonder Alvis Munro hit him, and called me a fool. I clapped my hands, and several burly men stepped forward. Merlin Bloom's gaze turned fearful. What are you going to do? I grinned. Beat you up. Getting my hands dirty and beating someone was too messy and tiring. Alvis Munro didn't want me to see Merlin Bloom, so I came secretly. On the way back, I checked multiple times to ensure there were no slip-ups before heading upstairs. When I looked up, Alvis Munro was standing at the door with an unclear expression. How does it feel? I was taken aback. How did he know? Alvis Munro saw right through what I was thinking and sneered. You charged the bodyguard's fee to my card. I told you not to meet Merlin Bloom, didn't I? So fierce. I pouted unhappily. You're being so fierce to me, and we're not even married yet. What will happen when we are? Alvis Munro had already stopped falling for my tricks. He slapped my butt and whispered something inappropriate in my ear. I not only dare to be fierce with you, but also dare to. I covered his mouth in shame and anger. It was simply disgraceful. Disgraceful. The end.